Hello everybody, welcome to my channel, Landscape Photography Processing. My name is Ian Cox. The purpose of this channel is essentially to pass on all the various tips and tricks and techniques that I've gathered over many years of using Photoshop and also Lightroom, and pass it on to you guys, the viewers. Now, in this first episode, what I want to address is the issue of haloing. Now, haloing is a pretty common problem. You see it a lot in images these days that have been processed digitally. And what it essentially is, it's where you find kind of lighter areas or whiter areas around objects. And that's a result usually of adding contrast or clarity or HDR toning, etc. Where you've got sort of big differences between light and darks. If you add in contrast in Lightroom or in Camera Raw or even Photoshop, you can start getting these areas. So for example, this particular picture here, I've got a lovely scene, sunset from the Yorkshire Dales National Park in the UK, near where I live. I've got a lone tree growing out of the limestone pavement at sunset. But the problem is I've already done my initial processing. This is an export from Lightroom. I've imported it as a smart object into Photoshop. And what we've got here, we're behind the tree. We've got this kind of very much lighter area. So if I zoom in a little bit, you'll see what I mean, especially on the background hills and around the tree, etc. And also some in the sky. So this was mainly a result of me using the kind of Lightroom settings and Lightroom filters in order to brighten up the tree, recover the details in the tree, and then adding contrast to the entire scene, and we're getting this halo kind of effect. So how do you go about fixing that? Now, as you probably know, if you've been using Photoshop for a while, there's a million and one different ways to do what you want it to do. Photoshop's an incredibly powerful piece of software. I'm sure plenty of people have got different techniques and tips that they use to address this problem. But the way that I do it is the one that works for me, and it's the one that I feel produces the most natural results. So let's get into it. How are we going to fix this halo around this tree? Now, the first step I use is to create a curves adjustments layer. So I'm going to come down to my adjustment layers and pick curves. Now, I'm not actually going to adjust this curve at all. What I'm going to do is put the curve in multiply blending mode. And what this should do is darken the photograph by about, I think it's about a stop or so of light that multiply does. So click that, and obviously that looks horrific. So what do we need to do? We need to basically mask all this out. The best way to do it is by inverting your layer mask. So at the moment it's white. Press Control or Command I on your keyboard, that turns to black, and that hides that whatever adjustment that curves is doing. In this case, it's the darkening down of the picture. So what we need to do now is mask in where we want this effect to take place. So the way we do this is by clicking on our layer mask, a black layer mask, and we're going to take a brush and we're going to press D on the keyboard, D, and make sure that white is our foreground color. Next step, I'm going to make my brush really big. So come up to the brush size. You can also use the square bracket keys on the keyboard as well, but make the brush really big. Yeah, maybe a little bit smaller than that. And then we're going to turn our flow right down. So the idea of this technique is to build up the effect as gradually as possible. So really large soft brush, 1% flow. And what I'm going to do is just start gradually painting in where we want this darker adjustment to show through. So I'm just gradually going around with my mouse, and you'll see that very slowly it will start taking effect. There we go. So you see all the detail coming back into the hills, and you want to bleed this into the sky just a little bit, just so there's kind of a natural transition. So just a little bit more. Actually, I'm going to make my brush a little bit smaller, just get in between some of these branches. And yeah, I think we're about there. So just eyeball it, make sure that the sort of surrounding areas match up as closely as possible. think about there is pretty good. Now we've got the background to essentially where we want it. So you look at these hills in the background and the sky, we've got it pretty much matching in terms of light. I'm just going to paint a little bit more in there. However, a side effect of this is we've now completely clipped the blacks and the shadows in the tree. It looks pretty horrible. So what we need to do now is extract this tree, or whatever it is, whatever object is causing your halo. You want to extract that from where the effect is taking place. And there's two methods to do this. I'll show you the first method, and that is using something called Blend If. And you'll find Blend If you double click on your curves adjustment layer, and that will bring up your layer styles. Now Blend If is probably one of the most useful tools that I use in photography processing. Don't think I could live without it. It's fantastic. So essentially what Blend If does, it will take out the effect of the layer or the adjustment that you're making depending on the luminosity values of the layers below it. So if you look down here, you've got these two bars here. One we want to use is the one that says underlying layer. And what you want to do is click on where the dark, so we want to take out the effect in the darker areas of the image. So you want to click on this little pointer here and hold down the Alt key or Option key if you're on a Mac, and that should split off into two. Now gradually you want to take the right hand one of them and just gradually move that up, and you should see in the tree, you should see the details in those shadows gradually start to come back. Now you're going to move that probably right to the top, and then if that's not enough, you can start playing around with this slider here, and you just want to gradually move it back until the halo starts to become more apparent. So if you go all the way up, obviously you're going to get your halos coming back around the tree, so you want to keep that down. Every image is going to be different, so you just need to play around with this until it just looks about right. In fact, if you go right down to the bottom, just a little touch. Yeah, I'm gonna leave it right at the bottom. Actually, that's about right. Actually, let's try moving this first one down a little bit more. Yeah, about there is pretty good. Like I said, you just have to play around. It's very much trial and error, finding out where these sliders need to go so your image looks natural. So after that, click OK, and there we go. So before, big white halos. After, everything looks a lot more balanced, a lot more. Now if you don't want to go down the Blend If route, if you want to be super accurate, which sometimes I do like to be, Blend If is a very convenient way of doing things, but it's pretty generic. So another way we could do things, let me just reset my Blend If. What we could do is actually do something called luminosity masking. There are tons and tons of videos out there on YouTube about luminosity masking, and it's an incredibly powerful technique. Myself, I've got all the Tony Kuiper actions and panels, etc., which incredibly useful bits of kit. There's the Raya Pro from Jimmy McIntyre, well worth checking out. Personally, I use the Tony Kuiper panels just because that's what I've been using since I started learning this. Fantastic bits of kit. The TK actions. But anyway, what we're going to do is a very basic version here. So you can look into luminosity mask if you really want to go precise. But what I'm going to do is just simply use the channels palette that's available to me here. So what we're going to try and do is get an accurate selection of the tree. The way we're going to do this, click on your RGB channel in the channels palette. Sometimes the channels palette you'll find it depends on how you've got your Photoshop workspace laid out. I like to have the channels in a separate box, but you might find them down near the layers and the paths as well. So find that, click on your RGB, and then we're just going to go through each of the red, green and blue channels to find out which one has the most contrast. So what's going to give us the best selection, sort of extracting this tree from the brighter areas in the sky behind it. So click on the red channel first. That's pretty contrasty, so you've got quite a bit of black in the tree and a lot of white in the sky. Let's look at the green channel. Not as good. So you see a lot of the contrast disappeared. And then click on the blue channel, see what this looks like. And yeah, even less contrasty. So I think the red channel's the best one for me to work with initially. Next thing I'll do is I'm going to click and drag on the red channel. I'm going to drag that down to this little bit of it's a piece of paper looking thing here, which is creating a copy of our red channel. Now you probably could use this in its state to create your selection for your mask, but what I'm going to do is refine it even more. So I'm going to press Control or Command L, and what we're going to do is essentially compress this so it's a lot more contrast. You're going to take your white point, move your white point up until essentially all the detail in the sky disappears, and then take your black point and just start moving the blacks up. So we can bring back some of the detail in the sky there. So just move that white point up a bit. All these little branches I'm not that fussed about. It's mainly the sort of bulk of the bigger branches in the tree. And I'm just going to increase the contrast just a little bit more with the midpoint slider. So yeah, about there's looking pretty good. So click OK, and that will save the changes of the levels onto your copy of the red channel. Next thing to do is to make a selection of this channel. Easiest way to do that is by clicking this kind of circle, this sort of dotted circle that you find on the bottom of the channels palette. Click that and you'll get all the marching ants, and what you've done there is essentially you've selected all of the lighter parts of the image, so you haven't selected the darker parts, which is what we don't want. So what we need to do is invert this selection by pressing Control or Command Shift I. Now you probably won't see much of a change, but that has now selected all of the darker parts rather than the brighter parts. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press Control or Command H to hide all those marching ants because they can be really annoying, and we're just going to go back down and click on our layer mask. I'm going to go down to our brush, so select your brush again, and this time you want black as your foreground color, so press D on your keyboard and then switch it so black is on top. What we're going to do, we're going to take our flow all the way up, and we just need one pass at this. So you're going to go select your mask and you're just going to paint on top, and you see magically details in the tree will start to come back, and make sure you get all of it, and there we go. So if you take a look at our mask, press Alt, so now we've got a incredibly accurate mask. We've got the tree, all the effect of your darkening is taken out on the tree. It's black, so it's not going to show up, whereas the white parts where your halos etc will show through. So again, before, after, and you've retained all the details in the tree. So let's look at another example quickly. I'm going to go to this seascape that I took, I think it's a couple of years ago now actually. It's on the East Yorkshire coast. Now there isn't a great deal of haloing, but what you can see, I've did an HDR in Lightroom where I combined 3 bracketed exposures, and the HDR process and adding some contrast, all the basic adjustments in Lightroom. What's this caused is a lot of these kind of, especially around these cliffs, you've got this kind of white, I suppose haloing is the best way to describe it, but these sort of brighter areas, and round here, especially up here going into the sky where I've added kind of contrast etc, it just looks odd. So we're going to use a similar technique, well actually the same technique. So first of all, again, curves layer, let's change the blend mode to multiply, and then Control I to invert our mask to hide everything. Select your brush by pressing B or hitting the brush icon. Take your flow right down again to 1%. Again, we're going to build this up gradually. D on the keyboard, and you want to select white as your foreground color. I'm going to make my brush sort of a lot smaller this time, but still you want to build this up gradually. So I'm just going to probably just use the kind of middle to edge of the brush, click, and just very gradually. I'm going to bleed this into the sky as well, just to make sure we get a nice natural transition of where this effect is taking place. Now again, don't worry about it bleeding over into where the cliffs are, because we'll fix that in a moment with what we just did. So again, it's just very gradually, again going into the sky, to make sure there's that sort of nice seamless transition. There we go, that's about right there. So before I go into trying the blend if, what I'm actually going to do is just to tidy up this. So I'm going to make my brush a lot smaller, and I'm going to press X to select black. Keep my flow down there actually, and I'm just going to see if I can just paint out some of this adjustment. I mean, if I had a lot more time, if I wasn't doing this video, I'd probably use things like the quick select tool, or if I really wanted to get super accurate, I'd go in and start using the pen tool to make an accurate selection of these cliffs, but we don't need to. You know, this is something you can do sort of fairly well with the techniques that we've been using here. So that's about there. So actually I'm going to probably zoom out to about 50%. So before, after, before, after. I've probably gone a little bit too far there actually, but I can sort that out in a minute. So again, let's try our blend if, double clicking on our curves layer, holding out Alt and split off our little arrows and just gradually dragging that up until that effect disappears from the cliff. And again, about there, let's try going up a little bit further. There you go, there's our halo coming back, so dragging that back down to the bottom. In fact, I'm just going to go a bit further down. Yeah, about there. Again, like I said before, every image is different, so you just got to play around with these sliders until you get something that looks fairly natural. That looks about right to my eyes, a little bit there, but no, it looks a lot better than before. So again, that's the after, before, after, before, after, before, after. If you think you've gone a little bit too far, all you need to do is drop your opacity down. So maybe I'm going to drop this down to about 80%. I'm just clicking on and off your adjustment just to check it's doing what it should be doing. That looks pretty good to my eye. Again, you might want to go in and tidy up your mask a little bit, but for the purposes of the video, I don't really need to. I'm fine with that. Now over here, because our tones are slightly different, I'm going to actually do this on another layer. So again, selecting curves, blend mode, multiply, invert our mask, and then let's go in with our much larger brush and flow at 1%, and we want our brush to be white, and we're just going to start painting in around these cliffs here. Now, the halo's not as bad as it was on the other side around this kind of cliff end, but there's still a little bit needed to do. Again, I'm going to sort of blend this into the sky and into the sea just a little bit to make sure we get that nice transition. Pretty good up there. Now let's go on to this bit. So there's a fairly prominent halo around this this sort of grassy edge on top of the cliffs. So I'm actually going to again use the kind of middle to edge of the brush and just gradually paint that in until we get something that looks sort of fairly natural. Again, I'm going to make my brush a lot bigger and just make sure that bleeds into the sky just a bit so we can get that nice natural transition. Again, I'm going to just come over these cliffs and just really get that edge there. Again, I'll probably spend a lot more time on this, you know, making my brush larger and smaller and making it look as good as possible. But you know, if you're doing this on your own images, feel free to spend a lot longer than I am on this. So, right, let's zoom back out, see how we're looking. So, yeah, I mean, it's not perfect. Again, I could be a lot more accurate. I could go in with a smaller brush and start really sort of getting into these brighter areas. In fact, let's just do this for the sake of the video. Brilliant. Okay, so first of all, let's try our blend if. Holding down Alt, grabbing our little pointers and just gradually bringing that out of the shadow. You see all the detail coming back into the cliffs. There it is, and you'll see it coming out of the skies. The sky's a lot darker on this side, so I'm just going to move that up to about, that's where I can see my halo coming back. Now I'm just going to try moving the bottom slider so just get a bit more detail where the light's hitting those cliffs, and just playing around until it looks sort of fairly natural. About there looks pretty good to me. Before, after, before, after. Again, we're losing a bit of detail on the in the grass, so what I'm going to do is just press select my brush, press X on my keyboard. I'm going to maybe just increase my flow to about 5% and just see if we can mask the adjustment out on these cliffs just a little bit where the blend if hasn't quite picked up in these highlights. Yeah, it looks pretty good there. So zooming up to full screen, before, after, before, after. And again, I think I've just gone a little bit too far there, so I'm just going to drop my opacity down to maybe about 70% this time. Before, after, before, after. And there we go. So that is how I get rid of the majority of the halos in my images. Again, I'll probably spend a lot more time on really making it a lot more accurate, and sort of maybe playing around with the curves adjustment. You can, even though we're on multiply blending mode, we can start playing around with these curves to really match the tones as good as we can. But I'll leave you to do that in your own images. Anyway, that's it for this episode. I hope you found this very useful. If you did, please like and subscribe. I'd appreciate any comments, anything you might find constructive, any suggestions for future episodes, and hopefully I'll be uploading quite a number of videos in the future. So I look forward to seeing you next time. Bye bye.